Okay, and welcome to today's. We're going to start talking about multiplication and division. So this one is going to focus mostly on, or all on multiplication. And before we actually get started with multiplication of polynomials, I'm going to do a quick review for you over the rules of exponents, because you do have to use those, obviously, to multiply polynomials. So let's go ahead and get started on these. So our first rule is going to be the product rule. And again, remember that the rule looks like if you have x to the m times x to the n power, then your answer is to add the powers and you get x to the m plus n. So an example of that would be if you had x to the 3 times x to the 4, then you would get x to the 7th power. Now, be sure that you remember we're also going to extend this so that if I have a negative 3 times a x to the negative 3 times x to the positive 4, and I add those, then that would give me x to the 1, okay? And of course, other things that we're going to do with this is we will have x to the something like 1/2 times maybe x to the 3/4. And so again, you would follow the product rule, which just says to add those. And of course, to add, we would need to get common denominators before we added, which is going to add in a little bit of extra work on there. And then we would add the denominators together. So again, that is your product rule. The next one that we have is the power rule. And a lot of times I will refer to that as a power to a power. So it is if you have x to the m, and then that is to the n power, the rule is to multiply the two, okay? And that we do see a lot with our multiplication of polynomials. So an example, again, might be if you have x to the 3 and that whole thing is to the 4th power, the rule would be to multiply the two. Same thing if you had a negative, okay, then you would still multiply. This time you would give you a negative 12. You could also have both being negative, which will also occur, and then negative times a negative makes that positive. And then again, we're going to extend those to our fractions. Maybe we have x to the 1/2 to the, let's say, 1/3 power, and then we would multiply those, which is just multiplying fractions, and so I would get 1/6 power, okay? Our next one is the quotient rule, which is our division rule, which says if I have x to the m over x to the n, the rule is to subtract. Now remember, when you subtract those, your answer is always in the numerator. So technically I could put this over a 1. So you remember that answer is in the numerator. But most of you don't need that over the 1. So example, if I have x to the 4, we'll go x to the 2 here, then I would subtract and get x to the 4 minus 2, which is x squared, okay? Then if we had negatives, or even if let's go with a x to the 3 and an x to the 5 go this way. This one would be 3 minus 5. This would be x to the negative 2. Now, hopefully most of you remember we don't leave that answer that way, because we'll talk about negative exponents next and what that means. But again, that is just the division rule. Again, we're going to do the same thing if we have fractions. You know, if you had x to the 1/2 over x to the 3/4, again, it would be x to the 1/2 minus 3/4, and so that would be x to the negative 1/4 on there. So again, those rules are going to continue on. Now, I'm going through this fairly quickly, but if you need more practice or more review on there, please let me know. Negative exponent rule, again, anything to the negative power, anything, is 1 over x to the n. So remember, in this case, the negative actually means reciprocal. Okay, it means the reciprocal of. Kind of like the negative when we did it with functions actually meant the inverse function. Okay, so you might think of it that way. Here, the negative here means the inverse of that, which would be 1 over x to the n. Okay, so an example, if I have x to the negative 3, then that's 1 over x to the 3. Now, the reverse would be if I had the negative in the denominator to start with, then the inverse or the reciprocal of that would now be in the numerator. Okay, so don't forget that. Okay, final one that we're going to review is anything to the 0 power, remember, is 1. Do not forget that. We'll also talk about this in another video where we talk about the polynomials and remembering that the constant has a power of 0. And again, it doesn't matter what we have. Anything to the 0 power is 1. We could have multiple things here. If it's to the 0 power, it's going to be 1. Okay, so remember that. Now, I have showed you pretty much everything here with variables because, again, remember your exponent rules are for the variables. If there are numbers, real numbers in your problem, they will continue to act as real numbers. So don't confuse your real numbers and how those act versus your rules of exponents and how they act. Okay, again, don't hesitate to see me if you need more help with this because we will be doing a lot with rules of exponents over the next couple of days.